Hello, and welcome to today's Head to Toe 365 webinar presentation, Vaccination from the Misinformation Virus. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. If you haven't done so already, please make sure your name and organization appear and are visible in Zoom. You can do this by clicking on the Participants button. Hover over your name and then click Rename. You can submit your questions to the panelists at any time during the presentation. To do so, just click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and type a question into the box that appears. We'll keep track of your questions for the panelists, and they'll address as many as time allows. If you have any technical issues, you can also use the separate chat feature on the right to communicate with me or my colleague, Catherine Vigil, directly. If you lose your connection and exit Zoom, you can return at any time using the same link that was included in your confirmation email. This session has been approved for 2 continuing education hours for social workers and 2.4 for nurses. To receive continuing education credit or a certificate of attendance, you will be directed to an evaluation at the end of this presentation. The evaluation will close in 48 hours. Your certificate will be emailed to you by the end of this week. In order to receive credit for participating in today's program, you will need to be present for the full 2 hours. To confirm attendance, we will take 2 attendance polls, one now and one later in the program. Participation in both polls is required to receive continuing education credit or a certificate of attendance. Before we get started, we'll launch the first poll now, which should be appearing on your screen. Click either response, then click submit to show that you are present. If you're not able to use the poll, please send Catherine a message in the chat. Without further ado, I'd now like to introduce the director of today's film, Vaccination from the Misinformation Virus, Chris Schueler, President and CEO of Christopher Productions. Chris?
Hey, Kristen, and welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. I know it's early and I know it's a crazy time with the holidays, but as we all know, as we're reading every day, vaccination is in the news, top of the page, top of the national nightly news and the local news. And we really appreciate your taking this time to join us. I've got a couple things I'm going to tell you as the film starts. One is at the end, we're going to give you tools. These are free tools. You can use all of them, and we'll tell you a little bit more about them as we get to the end of the film. And they're things that you can use to help spread correct, honest, truthful science information, which I think is really important to your colleagues, to your friends, to your family. We've also got an amazing lineup of panelists. So as the movie goes on, and you have things that pop into your head, questions. Many of the people from the film will be in the panel. We've also got a national expert, a former Assistant Surgeon General who's going to be joining us. So we can get your questions answered about almost anything. And I'm real excited about that. So go ahead, as the film goes on, if you have questions as it goes, go into the Q&A, put in your questions so we can sort of get a little head start on them. And some of our panelists will be joining us before the film ends, and we'll answer some of those as we go along as well. And then we'll do some live during the session. I want to tell you very briefly for just a minute how the film started because it's relevant. In 2017, way before we even knew about a pandemic, I had lunch with Dr. Walter Dehority from UNM, a pediatric infectious disease doctor. He'll be on our panel today too. And he said, we did a study over the last 90 years of the media's portrayal of vaccinations over the past 90 years. So movies and that sort of thing moving up into today. And the change from 90 years ago to today is dramatic. 90 years ago in the movies and the films, the Errol Flynns, the stars of the time were the heroes if they invented vaccines and saved the world. And now, as you know, with films like Legend, great film, but you get injected, you turn into a zombie. So that the portrayals of vaccinations have changed dramatically in the media, not only in movies, but in television as well. And as you know, dissemination of information and news has changed dramatically in the last decade, actually, with social media and everything else. So looking at all that, we wanted to create something that we could all use as a pushback and to help people understand science and understand vaccinations in a more meaningful way. So that's where the film came from. I'm looking forward to discussing this with you afterwards and answering questions that you may have. One note, and we'll say it again at the end, there is a website you can go to gather all this information. We've got the film available. We've got lift outs, curriculum guides, themisinformationvirus.com. themisinformationvirus.com. We'll tell you that again. We'll be putting it in the chat. Don't worry if you missed it. So take a look at the film, and we'll be back in about an hour and answer all sorts of questions. Thank you so much for joining us.
Our lifespan for most of human history was short, right? We had 40 years if we were lucky. And 45% of kids, depending on the era of history, died before the age of 5. And when you think about our lives, we get to see our children and our grandchildren grow up. The expectation is if you have a baby, you're going to get to see that baby grow up. That wasn't always the case. So the idea that we get these long lives, we get to see our children grow up, we can expect to see our children grow up. This is a gift of science.
I think we've forgotten a lot of lessons that we've learned over the last 100 years since vaccines were developed. There was a big polio outbreak, devastating. Then we developed the vaccine and we called it cured. We were free of polio. Likewise with measles, mumps, rubella, scarlet fever.
The medicine that has saved more lives than anything else is vaccines. Not insulin, not antibiotics, not medicines for blood pressure. It's vaccines that have saved the most lives. It's really a remarkable contribution to human health.
Funding for this program was provided by Presbyterian Healthcare Services, STC Health, the City of Albuquerque, and Safe Teen, New Mexico. Additional funding was provided by these generous underwriters.
It's now possible, for misinformation to appear on your computer screen and for you to quickly share that with 1,000 of your closest friends. That's the basis for misinformation to quickly go viral. We're facing a threat from misinformation itself as a viral epidemic of sorts.
So viruses, many viruses are incredibly contagious. They can suspend in the air. People can cough, sneeze, or touch another surface which someone else touches, which is then accentuated if those same people board an airplane or a train, cross continents, cross countries, and then before long, you have a virtual explosion of the virus all around the globe.
This is truly an unprecedented situation.
This virus does not discriminate. It attacks everyone.
The coronavirus has changed life as we know it across America.
I want to talk about the fact that if anybody's doubting getting the vaccine, please get the vaccine. This is not a hoax. This is real. It's very dangerous. It comes on quick.
I've always loved math since I was a child. I always liked, I feel like the structured math is very structured and there's a lot of rules, and so I always liked that. I was born in Mexico. My parents are pastors, and so I moved around when I was growing up. When I was 16, my parents moved to New Jersey. It was a Spanish congregation, and they wanted a Spanish-speaking pastor. I went to Cornell University for a summer program, and that's when for the first time, I was introduced to the fact that you could use mathematics to study infectious diseases and epidemics. So this is one of the computer simulations that we developed in early 2020, showing what would have happened if we lifted some of the restrictions in June 1st of 2020. Some of the restrictions that we included in our simulation included school closures, business closures, and mass gatherings. And so if you actually lifted all those restrictions on June 1st, you would have seen a secondary wave of infection. So I don't know if you've ever been to a restaurant or the park or a concert, and all of a sudden you smell smoke. You know that there's someone smoking in your vicinity. And so that's exactly how viruses spread. Because you can't see them, you can basically inhale those particles, then you could potentially get infected. So this is a social contact network of 2,000 people in California. And these are connections that they have, their kids have at schools, the parents have at work, and friends, or when they go to Starbucks and they meet other people at other places. And so you can see how highly connected we are. We actually touch our faces a lot, our mouths, our noses, our eyes. There was a study that was done, and they decided to use healthcare workers because they're supposed to be more aware of hygiene and viruses. And they noticed that on average, they touch their faces about 23 times in an hour. And face masks are actually protecting your mouth and your nose, and so even if you feel the urge to touch your mouth, you won't be able because you have something that's blocking your hands and your mouth. And so that's why face masks are very effective in helping us, in protecting us from getting infected. The spread of flu starts at airports, major cities, and then it soon starts spreading across the United States. Vaccinations help slow the spread of flu and all respiratory viruses such as measles and coronaviruses by removing bridges or connections that we have in our population. We're all interconnected. And when we get vaccinated, we are basically breaking those bridges or those connections. There's a very important number that determines how fast an epidemic can spread or a virus can spread, and that is the reproductive number. And so if the number is less than 1, that means that the virus cannot spread to even one person. But if this number is 1 or 2 or 3, then you have an exponential increase, and that means that one person can infect 3 people, and then those 3 people can infect three people, each of them. It varies from disease to disease. So for flu, it's about 1.2. Measles, on the other hand, the reproductive number is between 12 and 16. So one person can actually infect, on average, 12 to 16 people, and it's usually spread among children.
So the first effective measles vaccines come along about 1963 or so, and widely adopted. Now, let's come into the 2000s or so, and measles disappears, sorta. People forget about measles. It's not, your cousins don't get measles. You don't know kids in your class who got measles, and so some parents become complacent, become confused, and thinking that the measles vaccine is a dangerous thing when it is not. And so they withheld vaccine from their kids. Those kids accumulate, and just like a whole bunch of tinder out in the forest, you throw a spark of a virus amid a bunch of vulnerable kids, and you can have an explosion of measles cases, and that's what happens. The Disneyland outbreak from a few years ago.
We did everything right. I got my flu shot when I was pregnant because I was worried about pertussis and flu. And one of the first places we did a couple weeks after he got that first round of vaccines was Disneyland. We got married there. We announced my pregnancy with him there. I'd wear him in like the little baby carrier and he would just look up and he was just looking and listening and smelling and just very engaged from the first time we took him. I remember waking up, it was on Super Bowl Sunday, 2014, and I put my hand over and just kind of, touched him because I woke up, and he felt really warm. And he had a bunch of spots on his chest. And I was, at that point, measles had been in the news. So I was kind of like, I was like, no, I'm crazy. There's no way. There's no way that my baby has measles in 2014. And then the spots kind of got worse. They started kind of spreading down his trunk, and he had a couple on his face, a couple on his arms. I had no idea that measles could kill you. I had no idea. I went to nursing school. I had no idea because I've never seen it. I've never met anybody that, recently had it. I knew it was really contagious. So I called the ER before we went and I said, I think my baby might have measles. I can't get his fever down and we want to come in. The doctor had never seen measles, none of the nurses had ever seen measles. They were in the full PPE and taking it, again, very seriously, which was also terrifying. So they collected some blood and they gave him some medicine and watched him for a while. He was doing okay, so we went home. 4 days later, took 4 days. So his spots were starting to get better. He was on the upswing by then, but his eyes itched. We had to take him to like an ophthalmologist and just to make sure he didn't have any eye damage because you can get pretty serious eye complications from measles.
So this is a disease that was pretty close to being eradicated. And then we started to see a trend where people weren't getting vaccinated. So we've subsequently had some measles outbreaks starting in 2000s. We had a small measles outbreak here in the Baltimore metro region back in April of 2020. Again, because we're seeing less and less people get vaccinated and it's a highly contagious disease.
Which is why that it's important that each and every one of us is vaccinated against everything that has a vaccine. But over the last 2 decades, there's been a lot of pushback against vaccines.
I've spent the last year taking care of patients with COVID-19, and it was really hard, being a nurse, having spent years advocating for vaccines and for, public health, seeing people not taking it seriously and still seeing people not take it seriously. I know they have been spending years developing mRNA vaccines because I was working in a respiratory ICU. So I was one of the first ones to be able to get it. And I was so happy and so relieved. So I trust science. I trust, the people that have spent their entire lives developing these vaccines and studying science and doing it the right way. So one thing I, again, didn't realize about measles is that not only can it kill you right then when you're actively sick, but it can kill you years later. The younger you were when you got measles, the more likely it is to happen and feel a little safe. But every time that he was starting to get a little bit of a little cold, every time I'm like, is this it? Is this it? So yeah, so I've spent the last 6 years being afraid that he could still die from measles.
If enough people are immune, then it's hard for the virus to jump from one person to the next. With a virus like measles that is extremely transmissible, you have to have 95 or more % of the people protected, immune, to prevent transmission. Other viruses aren't quite so transmissible. You can get away with a smaller number. Herd immunity is about efficiency, and some of that herd immunity is being contributed by people who have had the disease before, some by people who are who've been vaccinated. But then the number is going to change based on whether, am I wearing a mask? Are you wearing a mask? How far apart are we? Am I singing at church and sending out droplets? All of those things, it's not like there's a magic number because the people keep moving around in the society and doing different things. And that number is probably different in different places on different days.
If you are engaged with the world just through a search engine, that's going to be a different lens than if you are regularly paying attention to people and institutions and sources that you have put your trust in over time. There is value in well-done professional journalism. There is value in academic research. We know who's putting that information together.
So I have a PhD in microbiology and immunology. And then I did postdoctoral training at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill in medical and public health microbiology. I am a Christian in my personal belief system, and I'm a scientist. And there's some people who would say, how is that even possible? I believe, for me personally, my science builds and reveals my faith, and my faith reveals my science. And so that, for me, is this perfect synergy of saying, I believe in things that I can't see. I believe in things that I've not yet discovered. I believe in things that are still even only theory, but I work to prove the theory. Now, was I talking about my faith or was I talking about my science? They go hand in hand. One thing that we're really learning so much about right now is called the microbiome. And that is this whole interaction of this microbial world inside our bodies. So bacteria that are naturally occurring, they're inside of our body to keep us healthy. So we have microbes that are part of our natural community. And then we have microbes that are pathogens. And those pathogens are the ones that cause disease. And so vaccines, they come in to play because they are able to then help our bodies combat the pathogens that cause disease in our bodies.
So the vaccine is actually injecting a portion of the pathogen you're trying to prevent without that causing any damage. We can inject just that part. Not capable of causing disease, but it is capable of allowing the immune system to learn and practice on it so that when you actually do see the pathogen, you're prepared.
And we produce antibodies, we produce T cells that are able to recognize that pathogen in the future. So if we get it exposed to it again, the whole immune response will start over again.
Your body is learning. It learns from the vaccine. The immune system practices so that when the actual time arrives, when you're exposed to the real pathogen, it's ready to go, armed and ready for battle. So I don't think it's an overstatement at all to say vaccinations are one of the most important medical advancements in history.
So the first vaccine was 1796. Edward Jenner develops the first vaccine, which is the vaccine to prevent smallpox. And the number one killer of humanity in history was smallpox. And that becomes vaccine preventable if you choose to take the vaccine.
So the traditional narrative is that Edward Jenner noted that milkmaids had fair complexions and didn't have pockmarks because they weren't infected with smallpox.
Mr. Jenner finally started to put two and two together about the milkmaids. The women that were working with the cows were not getting sick from smallpox, or they were getting very mild infections and they were all surviving, whereas it was killing something like a third of the people that were infected.
So through the process of milking the cows, they would come into contact with the cowpox secretions, they become infected, and then unknowingly that would provide them protection against the more dangerous smallpox.
From what I understand, the word vaccine comes from the Latin word vacca, from the cows, because of the cowpox story and the whole inoculation and things.
The real story is much more complex. The concept of purposely exposing someone to some infectious material to keep them safe from an infection actually probably went back several hundred years prior to that. The Chinese, Indian, and African societies had developed very similar technology. So Jenner didn't invent the idea of vaccination. He was the first to test it and to see the public health benefits, which were eventually shown to be true when 200 years later we actually did eradicate smallpox with a variant of his vaccine.
It's pretty obvious, even as a veterinarian, that as we come more in contact with wild animals and we start to expand our cities and our farmlands, that interaction with animals is going to get worse and worse. And so we have to worry more and more about these zoonotic diseases that can be passed from animals to people. Most notably rabies, which we know is a virus that's almost always fatal. One good way to protect people is to protect our pets and our animals, and that way it acts as a buffer. Having our dogs and cats vaccinated, and our other animals as well, protects them from getting infected, which then would protect us.
Hey Shannon, it's Monica from Native American College.
Hang tight, we got a couple of more sound checks to go, and then we will be live, so hold tight.
So we have a filming crew here, and they are making a documentary. This will be part of it, addressing some of the COVID-19 concerns, the vaccines, vaccine hesitancy.
So there's a break at 18 past the hour and one at 38 past the hour. I think she's starting with Shannon. Okay.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Tara Gatewood, joining you live from my homelands of Sherwood Dewey. Today we are going to start off in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. With us today is Shannon Shaw Duty. And so Shannon, you wrote an editorial in the Washington Post titled "My Osage Tribe is Swimming in Vaccines, but the people won't take them."
Well, we are unlike many Native communities outside of Oklahoma. We have been spared of the worst of COVID's harms. Also, there is historical trauma here. There is mistrust of the federal government. In the 1970s, Native American women were sterilized by Indian Health Service.
Our people tend to trust our doctors overall, and so that's who they will go to. Our people will tend to trust our elders, and that's who they will go to. Our people tend to trust our traditional practitioners, and that's who they will go to.
Well, during my upbringing, I was raised around a lot of medicine men. My great-grandparents, my grandpa, my dad. So a lot of what I do has been passed down through generation. A lot of our old folks, they pretty much, they're still rooted traditionally in their cultural. So a lot of them still practice the old ways, the traditional side of it.
This inherent responsibility to care for people, to care for culture, to care for land, animals, every living being. That's the core of our concept of health and wellness. We have our own ways of healing. We have our own ways of accessing traditional medicine and traditional healing. But in this case with this virus, we need to supplement that with Western medicine, and it calls for vaccination.
Going out there and getting vaccinated is one thing that I think everybody should look at. We all want to be safe, not with just ourselves, but our little families that we have, our community, our elders.
Being on the front lines, I did feel that it was really important to get the COVID vaccine just to help with safety, not only for myself and my family. I wanted to make sure that even though I was taking all the precautions, wearing a mask and doing social distancing, isolating myself from the rest of my family, that I was also safe enough to see patients and not provide an additional risk for the patients to get sick.
Also joining us today here in Studio 49 in Albuquerque is Dr. Melvina McCabe. And so, Dr. McCabe, with this historic time, we get to a conversation that is quite important and also revealing about the history and the traumas our Native nations have gone through.
In our history, we have had governmental policies that have impacted this distrust from the government. We've had our treaties broken. We've had research, unethical behavior being conducted in research. We've had in the clinical practice, as Shannon mentioned, the sterilization of our Indian women in the 1970s, and this was without their consent, without their knowledge. Our Native peoples know this, but anyone who wants to work with Indian country, they need to be aware of this. Some of the things that I've heard, and I think Shannon mentioned this, is that these vaccines were rushed, so they're afraid that they're not safe. There were strict protocols, strict oversight. There are independent groups that monitor these results and give their opinions on it. And these independent groups are scientists. They're not part necessarily of the Food and Drug Administration. All three of the vaccines, the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson, the J&J vaccine, all of them near 100% effective in reducing severity of disease. And severity is defined in this case as being hospitalized, being intubated, and even death.
On the line with us today is Susan out of Bethel, Alaska, tuned in to KYUK. Thank you for giving us a ring, Susan. You're on air.
I wanted to say that I got the vaccination as soon as I could. And when I have dialogues with others that have not gotten it or don't want to get it or are hesitating, don't let it turn into an argument, but just keep the dialogue open and really listen.
Dr. McCabe, we know how things go in our tribal communities. They're seeing news reports, and the moment something adverse gets reported about vaccines, people are buzzing about it.
The first comment I want to make is that there's lots of misinformation over social media. Before just really accepting that, again, go back to asking your doctors whether or not that kind of information is true.
All right, thank you for that, Dr. McCabe. Also here out of Seattle, Washington is Abigail Echohawk. She is the director of the Urban Indian Health Institute and the chief research officer at the Seattle Indian Health Board. And she is Pawnee. Our pleasure to have her here with us.
Out of the people that we surveyed, we found that 75% were willing to get vaccinated. However, simply because they were willing didn't mean that they didn't have hesitancies. We have local, regional, tribal centers who are putting out really good information. Go to where the information for Native people by Native people is.
All right, thank you for that. Plenty more to be said. Visit us online, nativeamericacalling.com.
I think we're done.
Studies have shown that compared to the more traditional forms of media, such as television, radio, newspapers, wire services, which tend to present a positive portrayal of immunizations, more modern forms of social media, such as Twitter and blogs and websites, are more likely to portray an anti-vaccination slant.
When schools went virtual, many of our households now had access to the technology. Many of them did not before that time. And so as students were being issued Chromebooks and other technology, here was another resource for accessing that information available to the rest of the world. We started to see that there were some not so reliable sources of information that were being shared and being passed along from household to household.
Every year, there's about 120 million Americans that get a flu vaccine. If you follow 120 million Americans for several weeks after a flu vaccine, things are going to happen. Those 120 million Americans will get heart attacks, they might be diagnosed with cancer, they may get bitten by a shark or struck by lightning. Most of the time, that has nothing to do with the vaccine, it's merely a coincidence. The rate of those adverse effects are often just the same, if not higher, in people who didn't get the vaccine.
Vaccines help create antibodies to fight diseases.
There are several kinds of vaccines.
Inactivated.
Inactivated vaccines use the killed version of the germ.
Live attenuated.
Use a weakened or attenuated form of the germ.
Toxoid.
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 Create immunity to the parts of the germ that cause a disease.
Subunit.
Recombinant.
Polysaccharide.
And
conjugate.
Give a targeted response to key parts of the germ.
Viral vector.
Viral vector.
Use a modified version
of a different virus
to deliver protection.
Like adenovirus,
which causes the common cold.
Adenovirus is used in some COVID-19 vaccines.
Now, going to the messenger RNA vaccines, which Pfizer and Moderna have, we have had the technology for the messenger RNA since 1990. So we've been working with this technology. The technology itself is not new.
So the science behind the vaccine has been working for 10 to 15 years. And now when we have a global pandemic, we take the science of the last decade and we build a vaccine based on that. And so while warp speed sounds good as a marketing piece, right? It sounds really good. Science never happens at warp speed. Science is always built by the scientists from before, and we take the backbone that was provided by each scientist and we move the field forward.
So we have many, many vaccines because we have many, many diseases. And so as we develop new technology, we see new vaccines. So we have now vaccines against human papillomavirus, which is the first cancer vaccine.
Vaccines protect you.
They are
effective
and safe.
They protect against
hepatitis A,
flu,
polio, rabies,
measles, mumps, rubella,
rotavirus,
smallpox,
chickenpox,
yellow fever,
diphtheria,
tetanus,
hepatitis B,
human papillomavirus,
whooping cough,
pneumococcal disease,
meningococcal disease,
shingles.
Vaccines save millions of lives
a year.
We have motivations for the information that we seek. At the end of the day, people want to be right. And people want to have a sense that their worldview is one that is validated. So we can be blind to information that really is at odds with what we thought was the way that the world worked.
So a lot of individuals think that they don't need the flu vaccine because they've never had the flu. They probably have had the flu, they just didn't get tested to confirm it. Many people believe they get sick from the flu vaccine. Most flu vaccines, though, are not capable of giving you the flu. And so they probably are infected with something else which they mistakenly believe is flu. And so some people believe, well, if I have to get vaccinated every year, clearly it's not working and I don't need to get it. That's also a false belief.
Hope Pharmacy, Chantel speaking. May I help you? We'll process everything on Friday and have it out delivered to you on Monday. Does that sound good? Okay.
So I grew up in Henrico County, but I spent a lot of time here in Churchill. My church that I attended is cattle corner here from this building. So I grew up attending that church. And so it feels good to be back here in a community that I was with for so long as a child. But there's still a lot of need. This is considered a food desert where we are. When we talk about a food desert, lack of having access to fresh fruits, fresh vegetables. So you'll see that there are a lot of corner stores located here, but they don't have the healthy foods, and that's what we really promote here. As soon as you walk in the door, it's nice, it's bright, and we want people to really have that access to it, and the prices are affordable. And so for me, the first thing I don't always think about is the medication. What are we doing different with things that can prevent you from having to go into the hospital and having to take medication? And so that's what we're trying to really promote here, the healthy lifestyle.
So we're gonna have to call the doctor on the blood pressure medicine.
I am a firm advocate of vaccinations. And so HOPE, Helping Others Physically Prosper, that's what it stands for. And vaccinations is key because we're having others physically prosper through education as well as immunizations, from influenza, from pneumonia and shingles, all those things that the community needs.
So what I'll do is we'll get the others filled and ordered for you and have them delivered out to you, okay?
You look a lot like your mom. I know I know your siblings, the twins. So my girls, Morgan and Kendall. So yeah, we're here to give you the comfort that you may need in order to make the best informed decision for yourself.
We're done.
We're done.
I don't know why they said that first. People are dying. This is not a joke. So I went ahead and got vaccinated. My daughter got vaccinated today. We're waiting for the younger children to get vaccinated because all of us are ready to just resume normal life.
I believe in the benefits and the healthiness of the community, and our families. And so those vaccines, I think they really, they are the instruments that'll keep us alive. I believe that a pharmacy really bridges the gap. This pharmacy is bridging the gap between the old and the new.
We come to Southside, so we can still take care of all of your prescription needs, all right? All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
I served in the Peace Corps in the Gambia, West Africa. I teach now, but I'm actually a practitioner by trade, so I spent 16 years in public health before transitioning to academia. So for a scientist, they would think, why can't you see the connection between COVID-19 deaths and just get vaccinated? It's just that simple, but it's not just that simple, right? It is that sometimes people will risk dying from a disease over the chances of living from something that they know nothing about based on the trauma that they've encountered within a system. I am obviously speaking as a Black woman, but we know that these injustices are not only against African Americans, right? We know that they tend to be absolutely against communities of color in general. We know that they are absolutely perpetuated against communities who are disenfranchised.
So I grew up in a colonia in southern New Mexico near the Texas border. Colonias are unincorporated towns. And so being unincorporated and rural and having a large migrant community means that there's a lot of poverty. My mom would have to drive us 26 miles to El Paso so that we could see our pediatrician, whereas most other people didn't access health care. So I'm a pulmonary critical care physician. I oversee adult medical specialties, which is various medicine-trained specialties, plus neuroscience, which includes neurosurgery. But for myself, growing up in a colonia, the hesitancy has more to do with immigration status and with language barriers. And so the hesitancy isn't about the vaccine per se, it's hesitancy to make yourself known and possibly face things like loss of job or deportation.
So some of the key factors that impact the access are the social determinants of health. We were asked to wash our hands. Well, many of our communities don't have running water. We were asked to physically distance. Many of our communities are living in multi-generational homes, so it's almost impossible to physical distance.
A lot of our Native American communities live on reservations, and they're very limited to transportation to get to testing. And so one of the things that we were able to provide this past year was a mobile unit for testing that actually brought testing to their communities, to their pueblos, to their reservations.
In COVID-19, I think we saw this play out, right? Where certain people, because of where they lived, because of where they worked, were at much higher risk for contracting the disease. People who worked essential jobs, right? And you're more likely to work an essential job if you're African American or if you're a minority. Much greater risk of exposure because you're around people, you have to go to work. Maybe you don't have sick leave. I might be insured, but do I have time to take off work to go to the doctor? Is there a doctor in my neighborhood? We also see residential segregation, and we see, again, more exposure because you're not able to safely isolate because you're living in more crowded housing.
And so what does it mean to be in a community where you can't afford the houses that are in your own community where you grew up? What does it mean to go to a grocery store and the meat within that store is spoiled? There are no fresh fruit and vegetables within the store, or the items within that store are overpriced. Where do you go? What do you do? Before you even think about, show up today at 12 o'clock for this vaccine, that for the layperson seems like it was just produced within the last couple of months. And I want you to trust the availability of this resource.
So I'm a geriatrician. I also ran the nursing home arm of California's Quality Improvement Organization. And then I ran a nursing home chain. And on February 29th of 2020, I heard about the first case of COVID in a nursing home in Washington state. And at that instant, I knew what was coming. This virus is deadly. It's deadly to older adults, and it's really deadly to people in small congregate spaces. So you'll see it in nursing homes where at the beginning with people not wearing masks, it spread like wildfire and it killed a lot of people. You'll also see it in communities of color in multi-generational households where the kids bring it from their work in a manufacturing plant, they bring it home. We anticipated that nursing home staff might not have the confidence to take the vaccine for a lot of reasons. The biggest reason being that a lot of nursing home staff are poor women of color.
But if you think about the healthcare system as a system that is part of a larger structure, part of an educational system, part of a law enforcement system, part of a social services system. If you look at healthcare as a part of these overarching larger systems that people interact with on a daily basis, then we understand why there could be hesitancy. We understand why there could be a lack of trust.
This virus has absolutely shone a light on social determinants of health. For people under the age of 65, 70% of the deaths in California of those under the age of 65 have been in Latinos.
So, in terms of historical trauma, if we think about Black Americans specifically living on plantations, being enslaved, being dehumanized on a regular basis, being raped and beaten and hung in public spares, being drowned, being mutilated. That's our history. That's how we landed here, right? That's how we came to know this country. And then if you think about, fast forward, people say, oh, but slavery was so long ago. If we think about the 60s, if we think about the 70s, if we think about the 80s, if we think about the 90s, if we think about the year 2000, if we think about the year 2021 and how Black Americans are treated within this country. People sometimes think of historical trauma as the retelling of bad stories that happened a long time ago, but that's not it. It is the trauma that occurred that continues to reoccur on a daily basis. When it comes to thinking about health equity and reducing health disparities, it's not just with healthcare, it's with all the systems that people of color, poor people, disenfranchised people encounter every single day.
I'm a physician assistant, and I am the medical director and chief quality officer for El Centro Family Health. So my biggest concern with the vaccine is that even though we've been really fast, fastest state in the country, is that for some individuals it's just not fast enough. We lost our first colleague to COVID on Christmas Day. A dear colleague of ours died on Christmas Day. And back then I said, man, if we would have just had the vaccine maybe a month earlier, she could still be here and her kids wouldn't be missing her on Christmas Day. Dennis!
Hello, Doc. How are you?
Good. How are you today?
Doing fine.
All right. Good to see you.
Likewise. Good to see you too.
And so working for a federally qualified health center, our job is to be the safety net. Some of the poorest counties in America when we talk about economic disparity.
Doc, I do have a concern, and it's basically pertaining to side effects that you might encounter.
Yes, there can be side effects. Usually they're very mild, but it's very common to get some mild flu-like symptoms, just feeling run down, low-grade fever, soreness, fatigue. Those are very common side effects. The range is usually those last, a couple of days at the longest. Nothing's perfect in life, and in healthcare the same. But it becomes about, odds. It becomes about, what's most likely to help you, weighing risks and benefits. And the truth is, when we're talking about vaccines, it's not close. It's not even close. So getting side effects from the COVID vaccine it's like a warm-up. Your body is getting prepared for a real battle later. And so in this warm-up, in this conditioning, getting your immune system conditioned to be able to fight off this deadly virus later. 18 more? Awesome. That's what I like to hear. Great. Good. We're getting those shots in arms. Thank you, girls. And some of the most vulnerable patients, if their physical challenges, their health challenges do not allow them to leave the house, we've got to get those folks vaccinated as well. But sometimes when you have a small population, you're able to mobilize better, and you actually get an advantage, and you end up being faster in those communities. Now within every community, there's still that equity. Now I just had last week my first patient, a family member, pass away, and recognizing if I could have just gotten her and that family vaccinated. 4 COVID infections in that family and 1 death. 1 long hauler now is what it's looking like, and that could have been prevented.
We're going to look at the different syringe types today. So remember, when we're doing vaccines, it's all about safety. Safety for you guys and safety for the patients.
But it's really important to remember that you chose a profession where it's not just about you, but it's about caring for patients who need care. So we have asked you to participate in a number of different COVID-19 vaccine clinics over the course of this past year.
As pharmacists or pharmacy students, when patients come to get the vaccine, we're able to speak about our knowledge about the drugs and make them feel safe and comfortable.
It's incredible to see that pharmacists have truly been, among other healthcare providers, but they've been on the front lines and in the communities and really helping to provide that hope for people.
We're going to have you wait for 15 minutes so we can monitor you for any adverse reactions. So we're going to places like Cimarron, Mora, Springer, Tucumcari, anywhere where they have less access to healthcare. I've been a pharmacist for 20 years, and now we find ourselves in a pandemic where tens of thousands of people are dying, and everybody needs to be vaccinated, which happens to be my specialized skill set. Just so you know, the most common side effect is soreness at the site of injection. So your arm will probably be a little sore tomorrow. That's normal, and I think it's good. So you know that the vaccine's doing what it's supposed to do, and you're getting a reaction.
Okay. Well, you've been real kind. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for getting vaccinated.
When physicians' offices closed during the pandemic, pharmacies didn't close because where else are people going to go? The closest person they can find that's a healthcare provider when everything's shut down is the pharmacist. Everybody lives within 5 miles of a pharmacy, right? So we're accessible and we're knowledgeable.
Coming into the pharmacy profession, we're able to be the middleman between patients and their medications.
And I feel like as a pharmacy we can do more. I feel like being as a front line in COVID pandemic, we've been doing more than just giving vaccines.
Our lifespan for most of human history was short, right? We had 40 years if we were lucky. That's what's changed for humanity. So, you know, I'm in my 60s. I would not have made it in most of human history, right? And I don't have grandkids, but my sister does. And I can watch those beautiful little ones grow up, and I can know when they're born that I've got a really good chance of getting to see that. So that's new to us, and that's a gift of science.
Okay, and we can just scroll here.
Yeah.
Right.
And then if you want to see...
Let's look at
the
evidence of the effectiveness of vaccines is that I don't know anybody who's ever had measles. I've never seen mumps. I've never seen rubella. That's the challenge of the vaccine arguments, because now disease doesn't happen, and we have to remind people who've never seen the disease that the disease exists, right? We have generations who never knew polio. Now my children's generation is a generation that will never know chickenpox. I think now coronavirus vaccine actually creates this new space of a generation that saw the impact of disease, and then they will see the impact of the vaccine. And that's what I think is the argument that we have to continue to make, that absence is the effectiveness.
We're going to see several big advancements. So we are working on needleless vaccine delivery systems, oral vaccines, vaccinations that can be given on the skin that would not involve a shot into a muscle. We're going to see some really elusive pathogens over the years that have been medical scourges that we have not been able to prevent that may come under the control of a vaccine. And perhaps, hopefully, what many people consider the holy grail of vaccination, an HIV or AIDS vaccine.
So mosaics was an idea that I had where you could weave together different viruses to try to get the most common forms of the virus. And so it got advanced then to 2 large-scale trials, and they're ongoing right now. So it's going to determine if it actually is able to prevent HIV people.
So the good news is that 2 technologies that were in development have now been proven to be really effective. The mRNA type of vaccines and the adenovirus vector type of vaccines. Now scientists can go back into the labs and test them against viruses and bacteria where there's no vaccine right now.
So one of the things I've been working on over the years is not just on HIV, but trying to get vaccines that might help prevent a next pandemic.
How do I get you, or anybody, willing to roll up your sleeve and take that injection? And the how do I convince you that it's worth it? It's worth it because you get years and years and years of protection against some pretty nasty viruses and bacteria, and that's why it's worth it.
So I sure hope that this crisis, that this does transfer beyond just COVID to other diseases, to other vaccines, that this allows us to have higher rates of hepatitis B vaccination, to have higher rates of childhood immunizations, influenza, across the board. And the same way, I hope that we never forget the pain that the disparity has caused. The obvious shortfall we've had as a society is that our most vulnerable folks had a much higher death rate. If you can't access just those basic social services, you're going to have a really hard time surviving a healthcare crisis.
So we all now are living in a chaotic world filled with information and with misinformation under many circumstances. Some of the best advice we can offer is to slow down a bit, to take a breath, to recognize that when you are met with a piece of information that seems to be dramatic, that seems to be telling a story that perhaps is too good to be true, that perhaps it is.
And we understand also that even while we might achieve herd immunity, that our lives are not going to be back to the normal that we knew. And this new normal is unknown. Once we have that better understanding, I think that it then will afford us the opportunity to do some meaningful work as tribal communities, and to do the real healing. Because Acoma isn't going anywhere. We've been here over 1,000 years. And if there are these hidden opportunities that result from all this, those are those little bits of lessons learned, I think, where we have a greater value for our lives on this earth and for each other. Those are the pieces that will ensure cultural vitality and sustainability 1,000 years from now.
I got vaccinated because I want to make sure my parents who are in their late 80s and live with me stay healthy.
I got vaccinated to protect our community.
I got vaccinated because of my mother. I would never do anything to put her life at risk.
Yo me he vacunado porque me quiero proteger de ser infectada, pero también quiero proteger a mi hija, a mi esposo y a mi comunidad.
I get vaccinated to protect everybody else. When I'm immune, it makes it harder for the virus to jump from person to person. For every vaccine given, that's a potential life saved.
And now, please help me welcome back the director of the vaccination from the Misinformation Virus, our moderator today, Chris Schueler.
Thanks, Kristen. And again, thank you all for joining us. And for those of you, we're real excited to welcome some folks from outside New Mexico. I know we have folks in New Mexico, from Sunland Park up to Taos, and from Espanola over to Los Alamos and all over the place. But we also have some folks visiting us today from New York and New Jersey and Florida and North Carolina and Texas and Pennsylvania, and welcome to New Mexico, the land of enchantment, and we're glad you're here. So let me just, I want to say one brief thing, and then we're going to introduce each of our panelists. I'm thrilled with who we have today, a wide variety of expertise. So if you have questions, this is the time to start putting them into the Q&A session. But some of you have been questioning in the chat how to get a hold of this. Again, you can go to the website, it's absolutely free, themisinformationvirus.com. And on that website, there is a free downloadable curriculum. You can look at the show, you can set up a screening, you can download 35 short videos from this film that you just saw. It's closed caption or it's open caption. You can get that in Spanish as well. So all that's available to you through that website. We'll mention it again later on. So what I'm going to do is introduce each of the panelists separately and let them have a couple minutes to give their views to you on the film and on what's happening today with the virus and hesitancy. And then we're going to go right into questions. So first, let me thank very much for joining us today. Rear Admiral Pamela Schweitzer is with us. Love your background, Admiral. That's fabulous. She served as the Assistant Surgeon General of the United States and was, cheer for her now, the first female Chief Pharmacist Officer of the United States Public Health Service, which is fabulous. She has won numbers of national awards. I won't go into all of them, but Admiral Schweitzer, we're so glad you could join us today.
Really glad to be here. Would you like to make my few comments right now?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, I just want to thank the Department of the Public Health Department and just all the people involved in putting this program together and pulling everybody together to be able to do this. And actually, more important, to all the work for those of you that are attending and have been helping for this pandemic going on for a couple of years now, just all the work that you're doing. You know, as you know, from a national level, everybody's watching everything that's going on, and what you are doing and each person's life that you impact is phenomenal. So thank you so much for all of that. What I want to do, and I was going to just introduce a little bit, back when the pandemic first started and they were talking about just COVID, this is before the vaccine. We knew a vaccine was in the works. There was so much misinformation going on during that time just about COVID. And we have a daughter and she's very into the social media. She'd be sharing, Mom, this is what I'm seeing. What do you think? And it would take me a day or two in research and I'd get back to her. And then I go, are you going to share that back? And she goes, well, it's too late. They've moved on to a new topic. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so hard to keep up with, you know, just all the information that was out there and the clicks and how things are going viral. And we knew, all of us that have, you know, I'm mainly into policy and doing all of that. We knew that this was going to be an issue when the vaccine came out because there already was an issue before with misinformation about the vaccines. So we knew this was, and I don't think any of us could have prepared for this. And I think what we've all learned about in this program, this documentary actually highlighted it really good, the importance of listening and to be empathetic. And for us, every single person that's attending and on this call, the value of having trusted resources for our communities to know where they can go to get accurate information. So then it's on us. How do we make sure we stay current? And how do we stay up so we're providing good information since we are trusted resources? So I think the documentary, it highlights all of that just wonderful. And when I had met Chris and he was working on this, it was very exciting to be able to work on this. And we've been going around and sharing, and Chris is wonderful to work with. He's a rock star with everything, just pulling together his enthusiasm, his positivity. And I actually, as you go through and you start working, you know, I just focus on my little community, my neighborhood, you know, my family. And when I go out, I was helping a lot with the mass vaccinations. I would start asking people, where do you get your information about the vaccine? How did you decide to come in today? You know, lots of the family, a lot of people that came in, it was because their family encouraged them. Their family may have been there with them as they came in to get their vaccine. And this is later on. Early on, everybody wanted to get it. This is later on. Family members brought their in. So we know that when we know that the things that actually help make it work, and then there's other folks that's going to be here. I don't want to take the whole time, but I just really am glad that you're here. It's an honor for me to be able to work on this project. And I know that I'm out of the office of the Surgeon General. this was a big highlight for them. They've put out a lot of documents. We've put links to those on Chris's website. And if there's an opportunity to show these in waiting rooms or put these on websites, all these materials, as Chris said, were free and are available, and you can cherry pick what you want to use, what's applicable to your area. And so much of this is about New Mexico. So I'd be really proud of all of this because New Mexico is highlighted very well in this documentary. So I'll pass it back to you, Chris. I've talked long enough.
Thank you, Admiral. We're glad you're here, and we're thrilled to have you. So, and by the way, I'm going to put our panelists to work. If the panelists can also open up that Q&A thing, if you haven't done it already, if you see something there you want to respond to that, because I know we're not going to get to all these live. Let me introduce our panelist, Dr. Walter Dehority. Dr. Dehority really started this thing in 2017, and just a quick note about him. He's an associate professor at the University of New Mexico Health Sciences Center. He's an associate professor of pediatric infectious diseases. He's also the principal investigator for the Moderna pediatric COVID-19 vaccine trial, which gives him a unique perspective on all this. Dr. Dehority?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chris. I think that what I'd like to say and highlight is that we're in this really unique moment in history, a real generational moment where vaccines are really at the forefront. And I haven't seen this since the days of polio in the 1950s, or really even envisioned we'd ever be in a position like this. And so it's gotten to the point where there are now articles in Cosmo on vaccines, Cosmopolitan. The View is having segments on immunization. Whoopi Goldberg got vaccinated on television. So really, this is a once in a generation thing. And I think because vaccines were so successful, we as a community really got kind of complacent. We were knocking off things one at a time. We got rid of Haemophilus meningitis, we got a chickenpox vaccine, we had a pneumonia vaccine, we had a cervical cancer vaccine, and we just kept checking the boxes. People forgot about polio, they forgot about measles, they forgot about mumps. And unfortunately, the power of vaccines has come to the forefront again because of COVID in a way that many of us could never have imagined. And so I think as educators, as healthcare providers, we can take advantage of that opportunity to educate about vaccines and demonstrate how useful and life-saving they can be. Not just the COVID vaccine either, although that's front and center, obviously, but the flu shot, funding for research into other vaccines. So take advantage of this moment in history to educate those around us. And this film is a great example of that.
Thanks, Dr. Dehority. And also on our panel is Dr. Denise Gonzales. She's Medical Director of Adult Medical Specialties and Neuroscience at Presbyterian Medical Group, and also telehealth services at Presbyterian Healthcare Services. And really applicable here, she's a pulmonary and critical care physician, and you saw her in the film. She had some wonderful thoughts on some of the hesitancy, particularly in the Latina community, but also a great view of just what's happened, not only in our state, but across the country. Dr. Gonzales?
Thanks, Chris, so very much. As a native New Mexican, I was thrilled to participate in this project. And it really has so much relevance for us all, especially now with COVID. And it's a critical time to talk about the history of vaccines and their impact on society. As my predecessor just pointed out, this documentary really talks about where we've been from the initial eradication of polio to where we are now. In the midst of a worldwide race to vaccinate against COVID-19. But we're not just battling the virus, we're battling that misinformation. It's much like a computer virus. So as a practicing pulmonary and critical care physician at Presbyterian, I've experienced the devastation of COVID on patients and their families. And I've also experienced the relief that came with vaccination. For myself personally, I felt so anxious going into work every day. I knew I needed to take care of those patients, but I worried about what I was going to take home. And once the vaccines came out, I just felt so much better about the safety of my family. Now it's extraordinary having not just one, but multiple COVID-19 vaccines available. It took about 30 years after the 1918 flu pandemic for a flu vaccine to become available. And until about 2016, The production of vaccines was very tedious, and the vaccine was only 70% effective. Fast forward to current times, the COVID vaccine took about a year to develop, and it has a greater than 90% efficacy at preventing serious illness. In fact, in my ICU practice currently, over 90% of patients on ventilators are unvaccinated against COVID. With this new technology, I have great hope for a rapid and effective response to future emerging infectious diseases so that we can hopefully prevent other worldwide pandemics. I want to thank all the filmmakers and everyone else who was involved with the project, and a great sense of pride that I have being a native New Mexican and having all of the other New Mexicans join in this project. We should all be very proud of the expertise that's available from our national labs, from our healthcare services, from our veterinary services and public health. So thank you again very much for asking me to join you on this wonderful project.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzales. We appreciate it. And another one of our stars here in New Mexico, I'm glad you pointed that out. I'm very proud to be from New Mexico. And one of our stars, Matthew Probst, is the medical director and chief quality officer of El Centro Family Health up in northern New Mexico. I will say this about him. He was awarded the Physician's Assistant of the Year. So we know he's known all across the country, but we're glad that we've captured him here and he stayed in New Mexico. He has also been sort of the vaccination or the head for distributing vaccines all over northern New Mexico. And I will mention that he contracted COVID. So not only a practitioner, but he's got personal experience with the whole thing. So Matthew, go ahead.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you, colleagues and partners, everybody on this call. Just the big weaving with the capital WE is what makes New Mexico special, and I do believe it's captured in this film so well. But really that bigger weaving for the whole country and the whole world, right? And so I think, what Walter said so well, the key word in his statement was opportunity. And I want to take the word within that being unity, and what we can do and what we need to do. And that this film is a tool in our health professional toolkit, but just in our human toolkit to try and bring people together, because the divisiveness has maybe been at least as big an enemy as COVID virus itself. And so within that, I think the key in the film for me as a primary care provider in a community health center and school-based health centers, shout out to all my school-based health center and school health matters peeps on this call, community, and the key word being unity. And so there we go, right? And so how can we bring our communities together? And I believe in New Mexico, that has been our strength. We know how to get through tough winters and tough situations, as tough people, as a resilient people. And the way to get through it is together. And that's the same thing in this pandemic. With that being said, healthcare. How do we bring people together? We put the care in healthcare. That's what we do. We tell people, as Pamela said, that we care about them. We let people know and feel that we care about them. And that's what this is all about right now. And what a wonderful resource I believe this film is for just that, not just for the science and to help people, wrap their head around what's going on, but the heart, and wrap their heart around it. As Chris said, I'm a COVID long hauler now. I'll have physical therapy today, and in my third month of that, I'm hoping to soon be back to my normal self soon. They say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's not true. It's not true. I don't feel stronger, but I do feel tougher. And I know what makes me stronger. It's the support of everyone around me, including the New Mexico Department of Health and everybody on this call and all of you holding me up. And let's just keep doing that for each other. Let's hold each other up and we'll get through this.
Thank you, sir. You can see why we had these people in the show. My goodness, passionate and hearts in the right places and brilliant. So let me start this question. And that is everybody's mind, everybody's asking about it. And I want to know, first we'll start with Dr. Dehority. With the Omicron variant, what do you know? What can you tell us? Where are we?
Yes, so the Omicron variant, I think that it's certainly concerning, and it's been named a variant of concern. I think one of the take-home messages is that we are still gathering information on this. And so there's a lot out there. This is there are advantages to living in a digital age and some disadvantages. And one of the disadvantages is the minute something like this pops up, there's a complete disconnect between the volume of information written about it and the amount of information we actually have on it. So there were just editorials and opinions and commentaries coming out seemingly within 24 hours of the announcement they had discovered this. And I think one of the things I would mention is to sort of tap the brakes a little bit. We need a little more solid data before we can draw firm conclusions about this. It might be a little less responsive to the vaccine. It might cause less severe disease, but I think we need a little bit more information. And in general, the things that we've been doing to keep ourselves safe are still the best tools we have against Omicron. So washing our hands, wearing a mask, physically distancing ourselves, and getting vaccinated. All of those are still the best tools we have against Omicron at the present time.
Yeah, I agree, Walter. It seems like the information just spreads so quickly, and it's all really speculation. We do need more time to observe to really know more definitively. Although it does seem like Omicron is unique in that it spreads much more quickly. The reports currently are that the spreading rate across the globe is such that it doubles every 2 to 3 days in terms of total number of people who are infected. It does seem like it is much more spreadable. So doing those other measures, like Walter just pointed out, wash your hands, wear a mask, socially distance, it works against COVID, it works against all viruses. So continue to do those things. It does seem, though, that the vaccine does work for the key things that matter most. It prevents you from getting so sick that you need to be hospitalized, prevents you from getting so sick that you need to see me because you're put on a ventilator, and prevents death. Those are the things that really matter. You might still get infected. That's not a failure of the vaccine. That's a success of the vaccine if you have mild symptoms and never have to go to the hospital.
Excellent. And I guess we need to know, Matt, you wanted to say something?
Well, I think, again, just back to holding each other up, everything that my colleagues just said, and especially holding up Denise and our hospital colleagues in New Mexico as they, just carry such a load for all of us in this state and what we can do. COVID's like a storm, and we predict it, we respond to it. We got to study what it did. But it does what it's going to do. That's the best what we can do. There is something we can do about it. And that's everything that was just said. And doing all of that, including getting vaccinated, is about holding each other up, because that helps from further overwhelming our very overwhelmed hospital system in New Mexico right now.
And that includes the booster too. There's a lot of discussion lately about getting the booster. And I know that's the message that we're trying to spread as much as possible for folks if they get boosted. And there's still some children, young children, that are not able to get vaccinated yet too. So we all need to do our part in our communities to protect that group.
How do you, Admiral Schweitzer, following up on that, how do you deal with, you and I have had this conversation before, you have a lot of friends who are politically on opposite ends of the spectrum. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that? I mean, people are dealing with it in their families. People are dealing with it in their communities, their neighbors. What do you suggest?
Well, I think it's more important, and thank you for asking that question. I think it's more important to have an open dialogue. So if you were to be around us, you would not be able to tell there's all different political views. I think the most important thing we've done is if you ever have questions or you need help or you want, let me know and I'll be happy to try to research it and answer for you. I've been trying to keep that so the dialogue's kept open. And it does work because when they see something in the news, they'll go, what is your take on this? I get a lot of that. What's your take on this? And that I may not convince them, but just keeping the dialogue open, being kind and not arguing and just staying their friend is probably the only tactic that I've been using right now. And I'll be honest with you, I'm never going to give up because we're health professionals and that's what we're trying to do. And that's what's helped me stay current with all the information. As the studies come out, I'm reading them so I can stay ahead of it and stay current and be able to share accurate information with them.
One of the Q&As that Admiral Schweitzer and I did was at the University of Arizona back in July, for goodness sake. And one of the things that, and it just sparked for me as you were speaking there, one of the gentlemen, was it Dr. Baker? Admiral, the guy from Phoenix? Yeah.
Dr. Baker.
And he had this wonderful statement. He said, you have to learn how to dance with people. And I was like, what? And he was a Q&A guy. And it's like, how do you get people not to be hesitant? You have to learn how to dance with them. And he said, let me give you an example. He said, everybody dances different. And when you first dance with your partner, whoever that is, you have to learn how to move and you have to learn what their moves are. And he said, the example he gave was he was speaking to the University of Arizona football team, who at the time in July had a 14% vaccination rate, 14% vaccination rate. He went in with charts and all the statistics and all the graphs and all the facts. And none of these guys they were just blank. It wasn't happening. And at the end of the conversation, he realized he wasn't doing their dance. And he said to them, here's the reason you should get vaccinated. Ohio State's football team is 95% vaccinated. And by goodness, the next day they were up to like 74% vaccination rate. And it was a matter of meeting them where they are. It's like you said, listening, meeting them where they are. That was key. I'm curious. We have a lot of people on this call: social workers, nurses, counselors, teachers, but particularly people who are working in the healthcare field. We get a lot of, and I had this happen to me. I trolled recently by a doctor, MD, who said, listen, you're not getting this, watch this. And it was a video of somebody who was talking about how the vaccines were a conspiracy and these. How do you deal with this in the medical profession with your colleagues or with nurses? What do you say and how do you deal with that? Matt, did you want to talk about that first? And I'm curious as to Dr. Gonzales and Dr. Dehority too.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's about relationships, just like you said. I've got the same thing here for Highlands University and our football team. You speak their language, you dance their dance, and their language is winning. And when for sports, you're going to be more competitive, you're going to win, you're going to spend less time off the field. In New Mexico and in El Norte here and in New Mexico, we dance rancheras and we dance two steps. And so you got to know those dances, right? And we dance at feast day at 8 Northern Pueblos, and you got to know those dances. Absolutely, that is true. But it's motivational interviewing is the scientific name, meeting people where they are. And what a perfect opportunity in this pandemic to practice your motivational interviewing skills. They'll help you with substance use disorder, they'll help you with smoking cessation, they'll help you for the rest of your career. So you get to practice that. In the end, it goes back to caring about people. And it's the same with our healthcare colleagues. And I love that you put sports out there. That's why I wanted to jump in. We've got our 100% San Miguel Medical Action Team that's all about, 100% communities providing access to 10 vital services, county by county, including medical. And we've been focused, obviously, on COVID, vaccinations, testing, treatment, et cetera. We also put Little Mora County in with us to support them in this initiative. We meet every week. And as Pamela said, at the table, we debate, we put it out there. That's what science is about at the table. But just like any team, when you go out there, you run the same play. It's no more arguing anymore. Well, I want to run this play. Well, I want to run this play. No. The community, if you want to win as a healthcare team, you got to be on the same page, partner. You got to have the same playbook and say, we're going to do this together. And here we can have a table where we have discussion and look at everything from every side. But when we get out there and present ourselves as a healthcare community to our broader community, we need to be all together and united.
Dr. Gonzales, how do you deal with that?
So when I'm talking to other healthcare providers, for example, nurses, I try to just relate the fact that I'm a real human, just like you. Just because it says MD after my name really doesn't mean a heck of a lot. And I share my personal experience. I share that I became vaccinated as soon as it was available, that my children and my husband were vaccinated as soon as it was available. Same thing for my mom. And that none of us have been infected, that all of us follow all of these other measures as just regular people, the people of southern New Mexico, and that we're healthy and well, and that I would want the same for them because I care about them. The discussion with physicians is a little bit different because it's not so much about being real, and it is a little bit more scientific. But I have to say that I've really only encountered one person directly who was opposed to this vaccine in particular, and it had to do with a particular religious argument. And that person is entitled to their opinion. I don't think any differently about that person. I still care about them very much, and hope that someday they'll become vaccinated, because I would hate for them to get infected and to get ill.
Dr. Dehority, thoughts?
Yeah, I like the dance analogy, and I think that, it really comes down to, sometimes it's not going to be love at first sight. That first dance may not lead to love, but you may have to dance multiple times with someone. But if you get off the dance floor, you're not going to have that connection. So you got to stay on the dance floor, sometimes all night long. There was a story that I was recently told by a colleague of mine that I probably will never forget. And I think it's really illustrates that concept of getting on the dance floor and staying with them, and also the power of one-on-one interactions. Because sometimes I think that we're used to we want to make big public health impact, right? We want to be on a webinar with 200 people, right? And sometimes you can lose sight of that one person. And my colleague told me a story that in their cul-de-sac, they have a neighbor who has different political views than they do. And they unannounced one day just said that they were never going to get a COVID vaccine and blah, blah, blah. And she said, I kind of walked off, and I thought I should say something to him, but I knew it was going to be a difficult conversation. We were going to end up yelling at each other. And so I never did. And so 2 months later, we'll call him David, wasn't around in the cul-de-sac, and she saw his wife and said, hey, what happened to David? And she said, oh, you didn't hear. He died of COVID last week, and he never got vaccinated. And so she says she always wonders, what if when I was taking out the trash can, if I had just had that conversation with David, perhaps he would have got vaccinated. Maybe he'd still be alive today, but I didn't have that talk because it was difficult. So I think that's I always think about that story when I have a patient or a family or a colleague or anyone that doesn't want to have that person might deserve my time. And it may be difficult, and it may be a conversation that goes on for weeks, but it's probably worth it to have that.
Wow. Thank you for that. One thing somebody had asked me, and you've all sort of alluded to it a bit, when we started this film, we were originally thinking, I don't know if you remember this, Dr. Doherty, we were originally thinking, okay, we're going to take all the pieces of misinformation, we're going to put them in the film, and then we're going to dispel those with science and with facts and with information. And we started doing that research, and then looking at how people make up their mind about things, in fact, has very little to do with the science and the facts. It's this heart thing. It's a political thing. It's whatever these things are. So the idea of speaking from the heart, as Matt was saying, the idea of saying, listen, I love you and I'm concerned about you. I've used this with my friends. I love you. I'm concerned about you. From my perspective, I would love you to get this. And here's what I did. And this is why. But I understand your concern, and let's talk about your concerns and sort of go from there. But a difficult situation for sure to deal with that. Admiral Schweitzer, the people are tired of the pandemic, and they've many times. I just did a screening in Georgia, and by the way, there's no pandemic in Georgia. It's just incredible. I was stunned. I got off the plane, no masks, no, and as a matter of fact, people were upset if you were wearing a mask, which was really crazy for me and hard to deal with. So Admiral Schweitzer, across the country, I know we have folks visiting from around the country, and everybody's traveling a little bit more. How should we deal with those changes in locale and those kinds of, I guess we just have to be aware of them?
We have to be aware that that's a good question. That's fair. And I think about this all the time. I'm not sure if this is I'll just tell you my perspective on this. So the same thing, I travel around and I notice somewhere, I'm in Arizona just right now, and there's not a pandemic here. People don't wear masks. So I'm a little bit, okay, we'll wear a mask. And the people that I love and care, they are not afraid to wear a mask. So we wear a mask everywhere. People don't ridicule us. I was over in Hawaii and everyone wears a mask there. So it made me, and I've been to different parts of the country, and people sometimes wear masks, sometimes don't. So I think some of it, this is just my personal opinion, has to do with leadership and the people there and the community and the peer pressure that maybe people in the individual community. You know, I've talked to ministers and people at different churches, and part of it has to be their attitude towards it. So I think we need to just be aware that it's like that. We have to be a role model as healthcare providers and as trusted healthcare sources, because people are going to be looking at us to see what we're going to do. So anyway, it's the same thing when I'm in my uniform. I'll be walking with somebody up to a street, and they want to jaywalk, and I go, I'm in uniform, I can't jaywalk. So I have to wait for the light to turn green before I cross in the crosswalk. But it's the same thing. We're providers. We need to be a role model and do the practice what we're preaching, basically, is what we're doing in the communities. But it is going to be different everywhere. We can't control all of that, but we can help influence the leaders in those communities and have those conversations, or at least have a dialogue, so that they can be open to call if they have questions. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? If we as providers have that relationship and trusted sources, that's golden, because they're going to call. Hey, I saw this in the news. What do you think about it? And you can help influence your circle of influence. You can help influence it. That's just, it's a little bit my opinion, but I think other people I see that written other places too.
We've had a couple questions come in, and along the lines of, listen, there's all this information out there. There's this scientific information, and you all are privy to that more so than the lay person because of your positions. How much of that? I mean, one person said there's just not enough transparency. We've got all this information on, say, the Pfizer vaccine or whatever, and then there's a concern that some of the people from the FDA are involved with the pharmaceutical companies in a more professional situation that may be a little misleading. How much information do you get, and how much of that should be transmitted to the public? Or does that depend? And I'll start with Dr. Dehority. What do you think? I mean, you're in this Moderna trial, right? So you've got access to information that we don't even know yet.
Yeah, sorry, I was answering the Q&A there. I missed the first half. Sort of like what information should be released from, say, a trial and when?
Yeah, and somebody was asking, they said, there's all this information. Why isn't it out there in the public? And we need to see more of that. And all the Pfizer, and it's 300 pages and 300,000 pages of documents. How come we're not seeing all this stuff?
You should chime in about the advisory boards, Dr. Doherty, because that's where a lot of those discussions are taking place too.
Yeah, I think, I can't speak to the specifics of that question. I can say that the results of the trials have been released publicly and rather quickly. So for example, in many of the journals like the New England Journal of Medicine, for example, you often have to pay to get most of their content. These vaccine studies and most of the COVID stuff was released relatively quickly and made free and available to the public. I actually can't speak to the specifics of that. I don't know if Dr. Schweitzer can, but the 300,000 pages and the 55-year thing, I don't know much about that. I do think that we have a responsibility to release trial data and rationale for a particular recommendation to the public, which I think has been done. But the specifics of that question, I actually can't speak to be honest.
Sure. One of the things that occurs to me, and Dr. Gonzales, I'd be curious as to your thoughts on this. I have heard from a lot of friends who are on the other side of the argument, and they say, listen, I don't get it. I'm not, for instance, here it's a slight change. I've had COVID. So I don't need to get the vaccine. Or I've read that the antibodies are I've got more now because I've had COVID. I don't need to get the booster. How do you deal with that question? And then I have another one, but go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a similar question on the chat, and the Rear Admiral and I both responded to it. So I'll share a little bit on my part. When one person gets infected with one virus, that person's immune system figures out how to respond to that virus. That's the immunity that person has, and it does wane over time. When you're vaccinated, you get an entire library, a big set of tools, like a big toolbox that gets presented to your body. So you have lots of strategies to respond to lots of variants. And so it's much more robust. So if you've been infected, yes, you have those antibodies. Then if you get boosted, you have much bigger response and library and availability of tools to respond to any other variant that may come your way. So yes, limited immunity for a short period of time to just that variant. Please get boosted, because then you'll have the entire toolbox to respond to any future variants that may come your way.
That is fabulous.
Didn't we do this for chickenpox too? I remember our kids having chickenpox, and then but when it came time later on, we got them all boosted when they got older, even though they had it, because it wasn't. We wanted to make sure that we got them all boosted. Do you guys remember that transitioning phase? Maybe not. My kids are older now.
Well, and that chickenpox is another good example of sort of that belief that, it's okay to get the virus. And, they used to have chickenpox parties where people would come over to your house and you'd infect them with chickenpox, ignoring the fact that some kids can get encephalitis from chickenpox and even die from it. Not to mention the fact they would miss school and parents miss work and things. So that was a great example too of like pushing back a little bit against that belief that it's not serious. We'll just get natural immunity, and that's a better way to go.
So Matt, how come Dr. Fauci is a flip-flopper? How come he told us not to wear masks and then to wear masks and now to get this and now do that? And he's a flip-flopper, man. What's the deal there? Tell me about science, how it works.
Oh, I don't know too much about science, but I'm a simple guy. I do, but I'm a simple guy, so I'll put it simply. I said it earlier, COVID's a storm. It goes where it's going to go. And we respond. And so the climate is constantly changing. That's just true about life always. But the difference is just how rapidly the changes happen with this in this environment, in this climate. And so that's the situation there. And, just a little bit more on following up on what my colleague said. So much of it is, yes, let's make sure and get the right information. Absolutely, that's true. But, everyone said it, letting someone know, I want you to get vaccinated because I can't handle another if only. I can't handle another if only. Those preventable deaths they're the toughest. As a loved one, as a community member, as a church member, as a healthcare provider for your patient or for your colleague. Preventable deaths, if only we could have been vaccinated. And so, I think that I care about you, and I don't want to see a bad outcome. And I used to say the single best thing over and over to all my patients, I'm a primary care guy. We do prevention. That's how we're wired. How many times have I said the single biggest thing you can do for your health is quit smoking? I say that's the second biggest thing now. The single biggest thing you can do for your health is get vaccinated. There's a lot of things you can do, but the single biggest thing you can do in this climate is to get vaccinated. And so I think there's that. On the flip side of that, and I don't like to think about sides anymore. We're all on one side. It's the human side. Maybe it's even bigger than that. It's just it's the life side, because this is affecting animals and our whole planet. So with that, you got to look at historical trauma. And there's truth to that. And I know if Dr. Parajon was on here, she would be talking about this too. We have to honor that we don't always do the right thing for people as a healthcare system. We haven't done that historically, and we do have to earn people's trust. And one of the worst things you can do in my culture and here in northern New Mexico and probably a lot of places is try and force somebody to do something. I have a lot of conversations with patients saying, thank you for explaining everything, but the thing that's the most sour is you're going to try and force me. And no, it's not about forcing you to do something. It's about, you having the information and having the choice to do the right thing. And that's really much more about, what we got to deal with here as a community.
Yeah, Matt, that's a really good point. I completely understand and resonate with people's desire to have autonomy, especially autonomy over your own body. What I want to relate to people is that if you don't get vaccinated because you're young and you think that you're healthy and it's not going to be that bad, but you end up in the hospital, especially now in New Mexico, that means that grandma's heart condition can't get treated because the hospitals right now are entirely filled with unvaccinated people who are on ventilators and filling up ICUs, filling up the non-ICU parts of the hospital, and we're deferring care for everybody else. So grandma can't get her heart fixed. Your uncle, your aunt can't get their knee fixed. Routine stuff that should normally come into the hospital and have no problem is getting deferred, and people are even getting turned away or forced to wait for several days in an emergency department to get routine care for other problems because we're so overrun with COVID cases amongst the unvaccinated who could have gotten vaccinated and stayed out of the hospital.
It really is. That's the right thing to do. And it is holding each other up, taking care of each other. We're doing the same thing in primary care right now. We're looking at our own version of crisis standard of care so we can maintain same day access. And that means delaying preventative care and chronic disease management. It's what we've got to do with limited resources and more need than ever. And I, again, back to my little analogy that I use for smoking. The other one I say is, there's also secondhand smoke. So it's not just about you get to choose what you do with your lungs, but the secondhand smoke and what that does to, to those little kiddos sitting in the car next to you or whatever the case may be. And so, I use that analogy a lot too, because it's not just about your own health, it's the impact on others. Thank you so much for Denise for verbalizing that.
And Matt, I loved how you described it in the film, and you spoke even more about it. We always have to tighten things up, but the idea of explaining the situation and giving them the odds. I mean, here's the odds, and you just have to look at the odds, and it's not even close if you look at it. And now with all the millions, Dr. Dehority, how many people have had the vaccine now nationally? I mean, everybody is worried, I'm going to wait. There was this group of people, I remember them specifically, and you do too, I'm sure, who said, I'm going to wait a little bit, see how this goes. Well, where are we with that?
Yeah, I think what I like to tell people is we've had about 6 billion vaccines given globally. And I think that's my favorite statistic, because people will often say, well, I'm concerned about the safety of this vaccine. It's an experimental vaccine. We don't know much about it. The technology in those messenger RNA vaccines is about 30 years old. And we've had about 6 billion people receive at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. And so, it is really at the point now that it's been over a year, that many people have been immunized. I have a hard time saying it's an experimental vaccine. And so if you're taking that stand, of not getting vaccinated because you want more data on the vaccine, what you're really doing is enrolling yourself in another study, which is what happens if I get COVID long-term. So you're going to be in one sort of population-based study or the other. What happens if I get vaccinated or what happens if I get COVID? You're just making a different choice.
And it's a great analogy. And boy, where are we with, and I don't know if you can speak to this, but where are you with your current study? And you're working with kids, real young kids, right?
Yeah, so we're going down to 6 months of age, and both Pfizer and Moderna, I believe, are going down to 6 months of age. We are about ready to wrap up the last dose in the youngest kids. So by the end of December, we'll be done with both doses in that cohort, and then we'll follow them for about a year after the vaccine for long-term safety and breakthrough infections and things like that. So we're wrapping up the vaccine portion of the study and entering long-term follow-up.
And one other question, this is just interesting to me, and somebody was asking about parents and their kids and stuff, and it sort of applies to that. You had mentioned to me that within, and it was one of your studies, and forgive me which one it was, but you had to get the approval of the kid, not just the parent. Talk about that a little bit. I think that's fascinating.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So to do human subjects research, we need to get assent from children. So depending on the age, but typically 7 years old and above, the child has to agree to be in the study. The parents obviously have to consent as well. But if the child doesn't want to be in the study, they don't have to be in the study. And we had that. We had one, I remember distinctly, one 9-year-old came into my office. Her parents had already signed the consent. She was crying and said she was afraid of the needle and she didn't want to do it. So I said, okay, thank you for coming. You're very brave, but you don't have to do this. And so we unenrolled her from the study. What I think is super interesting is I had several children email me, 10 years old, 9 years old, 12 years old, asking if they could be in the study. And they said, I don't know if my parents will drive me. I don't know if they want me to do this, but can you get me in the study? Can you call me a cab or something or an Uber and bring me? And those are really interesting emails that I got. And that was more common than you might think, where a child wanted the vaccine and their parents were a little bit hesitant. So that was an interesting situation.
That's fascinating. So listen, we've got just a few minutes left. I want to make one quick comment about our website and our challenge to you. We so appreciate your being here today. And then we're going to go through and let each of you spend maybe a minute or so just sort of wrapping up your final thoughts here. But the website again, and it's been in the chat and you've got it all over the place, the misinformationvirus.com. Any of these tools are available to you. We've got a curriculum guide that's downloadable. We've got 35, we call them lift out videos. So when Dr. Dehority talked about the misconceptions around flu vaccine, that is a lift out video that's 45 seconds long. There's a list of those on that website. So it says flu vaccine misconceptions, Dr. Walter Dehority. Here's the link, download it in Spanish or English. Spanish subtitles, I should say, or English. So we've got 35 of those available. We've got a shortened version of the documentary, a 30-minute version. We've got the full documentary, and there's a thing that says if you want to screen it, just click here, and it puts you direct contact with me. I can get you the downloadable version. If you want to share this documentary on your social media, there is a link on the website to do that. So we would challenge you, you can use, it's not really a challenge, it's here's the tools. Use them any way you like with your PTAs. I know somebody mentioned the PTAs. We've got it going into every PTA in the state of New Mexico in the next month, along with the curriculum guide. It's a real turnkey, easy way to show it. Small groups, faith communities. Use this to start the conversation. Use this to begin a conversation with your personal community in any way you like. So that's all there through that website. That being said, let's go around and we'll start with you, Admiral Schweitzer, and then we're just going to go around robin and sort of finish things up here. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I know Matt may talk about the same thing, but I think what I just want to say is that we know, we've been hearing all around the United States, and we experience it even here where I am. It's just people getting angry or people being frustrated. This is, in the communities with public health or with providers or just with this whole thing. And if we can, what I'm concerned about is all of you practitioners, nurses, all the healthcare professionals, all the public health, that you're okay, and that you realize that they're just venting, and try not to take that personally. It's really hard. I know, Chris, you were talking about just you being associated with this production and the people that come out. Anyway, I just want to make sure you're taking care. Everybody's taking care of yourself as we go through the holidays. This is a time about caring for one another and taking care of our families too. And I hope in our families, the part that we can influence a little bit, that we can encourage them and focus in our neighborhoods to keep, we got to keep going. This pandemic isn't going to be over anytime soon. And the more people that are unvaccinated, the more chance there's going to be another variant that's out there. So anyway, anything that we can do, I just don't want people to be stressed out. That's actually the biggest concern right now, is the stress that I see my colleagues that are providers and day in, day out. It's just too much coming at them. And with the holidays, it's going to even be worse.
Thank you, Admiral. We appreciate it. Dr. Dehority, about a minute.
Yeah, I think maybe the only good thing that's come out of the pandemic, aside from some new vaccine technology, is that we have seen partnerships form and communities strengthen in some instances. And so, although there has been division in this pandemic, there is also an equal opportunity, if we choose to take it, to build bridges and build coalitions, to educate, to care for those in our community. And I would just urge people, no matter what path of life you're in, or whether you're an employer, an employee, or a healthcare provider, physician, nurse, whatever, you have an opportunity in your daily life to build those bridges, build community, and bring people together. And so trying to use this pandemic as really a platform to strengthen those community ties, any opportunity you get, I think that's something I would try to do in the coming year.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Gonzales?
Yeah, I think that there have been some strange silver linings to this pandemic. The fact that we're all doing a Zoom conference right now wouldn't have happened were it not for us being forced to do it due to the response to the pandemic. I grew up watching those ABC shorts that would come out on Saturday mornings. And so I think there was one about necessity is the mother of invention. Regarding COVID, I do just want to thank everybody who has participated on the panel, on the production, as well as all of you who are in the audience today. It shows your interest and your desire to build those bridges and to help your community. So thank you to all of you. It's certainly a daily opportunity for you to continue being heroes in helping your communities. And please, I don't want to see any more people in the ICU with COVID. It's tragic. I entered the field at a point where the mortality rate in the ICU was decreasing, and now having so many people die, it's devastating. So please, everybody, get vaccinated and do the other measures, because we're all in healthcare feeling quite overwhelmed because this isn't something that we ever wanted to see happen.
Thank you, Doctor. Matt?
Yeah, following that, and I'm going to extend it a little longer. I see some some educators on here, and to my teacher patients that are looking like they normally look in April because they're just getting to the finish line before summer, and they already look like that because they're overwhelmed too. And so it's not just us in healthcare, it's broader, but together, I've got a scar on my face. It's getting better because I delayed, a biopsy, saying I'll deal with it after the pandemic. And now I can't look myself in the face ever again and say I'll take care of myself later because I'm too busy now. I'll never do it again. I'll never do it again, as I have a scar to remind me, and I'm looking at each of you and saying, don't do that. Take care of yourself, hold each other up. You know, I'm here at the ranch. I've got, you know, the ranch to the north of me and the ranch to the east. They both lost their patriarchs, and the one to the east, both unvaccinated, on his deathbed, telling the whole familia, please, my last dying wish is, I messed up, I'll get vaccinated. And his little grandkid, Hita, who's one of my semillas de salud, growing our own future health professionals, you know, coming into the school-based health center and saying, I'm ready. But while you need parents' consent, because you're 17, I know I can get you a LARC and contraception, but at 17, I'm sorry, I can't. You need parental consent. And, you know, what can we do, right? What can we do together, whether it's policy, whether it's just caring for each other? It's an opportunity, as I said earlier, an opportunity to take care of ourselves, take care of each other, come together as a community, with that key word in both being unity.
Thank you all so much. And thank you all for joining us today. And we appreciate it so very much, your passion and your care. Kristen.
Thank you to Dr. Dehority, Dr. Gonzales, Matthew Probst, and Rear Admiral Schweitzer for joining our panel today, and to Chris Schueler for moderating, and to everyone for that wonderful, timely, powerful discussion, and for your generous support of our school health community. We have one more quick attendance poll right now, and don't forget to complete the evaluation using the link in the chat. This link will also be emailed to you shortly. Remember, completing the attendance polls and the evaluation are requirements to receive continuing education credit or a certificate of attendance. Also, please like the Head to Toe Facebook page for announcements on upcoming sessions. And this link has also been placed in the chat. Thank you for attending this morning's session, and have a great day.